So Jane, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Love to. Thanks, Natalie. And thank you so much for the opportunity, and welcome everyone. And thanks for joining us this evening. So just a couple of sentences of introduction in terms of who Carl and I who we are. So I fell in love with the planet and nature back in the 1970s. I fell in love with David Attenborough, and I just had this amazing awe for nature, animals, etc. I was in the corporate world for about 33 years, and then in 2019 decided to co-found Grove Carbon with Carl and put all of my experiences and my energies into something that truly matters, actually. So Carl.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Natalie, and again for everyone that's joined to find out more and hear more about carbon offsetting. For me, I've always had a passion about the planet and people, but it wasn't until I watched Before the Flood that it really hit home the damage we've done by burning fossil fuels and continue to do by burning fossil fuels. So I kind of vowed to myself when I had the opportunity to move to Miami, because of my amazing wife and her position as British Consul General for Florida, Puerto Rico, and USVI. And super grateful to her, because without her, I wouldn't have the opportunity to meet Jane and co-found Grove Carbon. So I took some personal steps before founding the company by making sure that I was doing everything I could on a personal level to reduce my negative impact on the environment. And with that, I look forward to presenting what we at Grove Carbon are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Okay, so before we dig deep into what carbon offsetting is all about and how it works, I think just to remind ourselves, probably most people on the webinar this evening really understand the causes of climate change and the impacts, but just to frame it up and remind ourselves, CO2 is really the largest contributor by volume in terms of greenhouse gases. And carbon offsetting as a solution has been around for a few decades now, probably becoming more and more familiar in the last couple of years. But still, I think people have a lot of unanswered questions around really what carbon offsetting is all about. So Grove Carbon was founded as an end-to-end carbon offsetting agency, and we're going to be explaining really what that means during the course of this presentation this evening. Again, just to frame things up and to remind ourselves, we all have an unavoidable carbon footprint. And really, even though a lot of us are taking steps to reduce our carbon footprint and to not be as wasteful as we may have been a decade ago with the awareness of what's going on, we still have this unavoidable carbon footprint. In actual fact, air conditioning and heating, it's one of the biggest culprits. People tend to think, oh, it's mostly transport, particularly air travel, or it's manufacturing. But honestly, this is a huge culprit and a huge reason for a lot of these emissions. And it's all to make ourselves feel comfortable, which is a bit shocking, really. And then there's other solutions that are still a little price prohibitive for a lot of us, like EVs. You know, I certainly don't have one yet, but I hope to in the future. One of the staggering statistics for me is that in 2019, Americans spent just shy of $50 billion on cosmetics. Listen, I'm to blame here as well. I probably have, or I should have, shares in Revlon by now, having been a bit of a product junkie when I was younger. But you know, these are ways that we can reduce waste, but also, you know, this is the way we live. And until we have 100% renewable energy from manufacturing and our energy sources, we are always going to have what we call this unavoidable carbon footprint. Again, little frame up. I think most of you, particularly as in South Florida, were very familiar with what's been happening and the rate of climate crisis in recent years, I find it a little horrifying that it was only last year that Miami recorded its hottest week ever, last June. So the race is on, basically, and carbon offsetting is a solution. Not only is it a solution, but it's a solution that both businesses and individuals can get behind. And you can identify, calculate, understand your carbon footprint, and at the same time, take some steps to offset your carbon footprint. Proud to say that Grove Carbon is Florida, not just South Florida's only carbon offsetting agency. So Colin and I are super proud of that fact. And now I'm going to take a step back to explain what I meant when I said before that we are an end-to-end carbon offsetting agency. So how does it work and what are we selling? These are real photos of some of the people that we've helped with our carbon offsetting projects, and I'll come on to describe and explain who these individuals are in a little while. But just another statistic that I find quite staggering, there are just shy of 8 billion people on the planet, and over 3 billion people around the world still cook on open fires. It's really shocking to think that in 2021 that is still the case. And the thing about open fires is they do emit a huge amount of CO2, and they are a health risk and a health hazard. Not only that, but there's a lot of people around the world who don't have access to clean, safe drinking water, which means they have to boil water to be able to cook and to be able to wash and drink. So carbon offsetting projects work in this way. We partner with NGOs or organizations in developing countries that provide households and communities with either access to safe, clean drinking water, so they don't have to boil water all day long, or distribution of what we call efficient cook stoves, or GCOs. Now, these efficient cook stoves, and they're those little yellow stoves that you can see in the pictures. These actually, they're efficient because they burn a third of the firewood that an open fire would, and therefore emit a third of the CO2 into the atmosphere. So what we're doing is we are creating an environment where we have carbon credits in one part of the world to be able to sell those credits to people in North America or globally who wish to offset their carbon footprint. And there are many co-benefits to this, which Carl will explain in a little while, but essentially we are not just helping people in impoverished countries, but we're also doing something about reducing emissions in other parts of the world. And so too will you if you engage in carbon offsetting programs. Now, you might say, well, that's interesting, but how do we know, how is this calculated? Well, there are two global standards. One is called the gold standard, based in Switzerland. Vera is based in the US. And there are methodologies that scientifically and accurately calculate what tonnage of CO2 is being saved by these GCOs, or by providing people with access to clean, safe drinking water, or indeed avoided deforestation, because that's another project that, and land use that feeds into carbon offsetting programs. So what are we doing at Grove Carbon? We are currently looking at partnering with agencies, NGOs, and manufacturers of GCOs in Guatemala and Nicaragua. And we're also looking into partnering with organizations and coffee growers in Haiti. Today, we support programs through our sister agency in the UK, CO2 Balance. We are supporting programs in Africa and Brazil. So we do have carbon credits for sale right now, today. And shortly, I would say in the next 12 to 18 months, we will have carbon credits available from Latin America. Our goal is really to look at Latin America, given that we are in North America, and to also be able to help people in the Caribbean and Latin America. So let's talk a little bit about what individuals can do. There are a number of different solutions. Some of you may be very much aware of what's out there, and some of you may not. What we've done at Grove Carbon is we have two different solutions. We have a fairly unique solution, actually, which was created by Carl. I'm super proud of what he's done here. We have on our website what we call a DIY carbon offsetting functionality. And we have taken the World Resource Institute's data, and we've provided a list of the tonnage, the per capita, per country tonnage of carbon emissions. So if you don't really know, for example, how much mileage you use per year in your car, if you're not really clear on how to calculate your own carbon footprint, then you could just take what we're calling the Newbie Route. So it's really for people who are new to this whole offsetting game. And you could support programs by donating your country's average carbon footprint per capita. And you might be surprised to learn how relatively cheap it is to do so. A household of two, it can cost as little as $250 a year to offset your carbon footprint. Now, some of you may say, well, that's all very well, but I've taken steps to reduce my carbon footprint. Or you might say, well, actually, I travel a lot for business, so I feel like I need to contribute more because my carbon footprint is a lot higher. So we are currently about to launch, and we're literally in the final stages of this, a more complex carbon calculator, whereby you can input the size of your property, your mileage, your trips per year, your dietary habits, so on and so forth. So you can come up with a more exact measure of your own personal carbon footprint. So we have one solution available today. There will be another one ready, if not tomorrow, on Monday. And it really is our mission, in all honesty, to make it easy and accessible for people. And of course, $250 actually might be a lot for some people. So we will also have a solution where you can support programs on a monthly basis and offset your carbon footprint. Now, when you do this, you will get a little certificate from Grove Carbon, and you will be able to very proudly place that certificate wherever you wish as having contributed to helping people in impoverished countries and also offsetting your carbon footprint. Now, when it comes to businesses, obviously, this is a much more sophisticated situation. So companies or businesses or organizations, they may have a number of brick and mortar locations. They may also have a digital footprint. They may have logistics, like, maybe they're a transport fleet or a warehousing operation. So in this event, what we do is we do an audit, and we are certified greenhouse gas auditors at Grove Carbon. And this first step is to do an audit of your business, so we can accurately measure what your annual carbon footprint is and what your greenhouse gas emissions are. And then the second step would be to decide, okay, can I as an organization, do I have the budget to offset my company's carbon footprint fully in year one, or do I get on a journey? Because it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And that's what we mean by becoming Grove Carbon Wise. So organizations, or indeed individuals who don't have the budget to fully offset their carbon footprint in year one, can partially offset, and you become Grove Carbon Wise. The ultimate goal, obviously, is to become carbon neutral and fully offset your footprint. But this can be a journey. And obviously, the ultimate end point is to become climate positive, where you're actually offsetting more than your annual footprint. So I mentioned earlier some of the people that we have been helping. These are all people in Guatemala, in a town just outside Antigua in Guatemala. And we were very fortunate to visit with an NGO called Stove Team International, their projects in Guatemala in January 2020, right before the lockdown. And so these are real photos of real people that I took while we were out there. Christina there, she was 16 when she had her little girl, Sophia. She was under threat of having Sophia being taken by the authorities because in her household, they were still burning on open wood fires. And we were able to provide a GCO to Christina and her family, and she was able to keep Sophia. And it was a very powerful moment for us to see that added impact that we had on a family and a household. Likewise, the lady there in the middle, that's Rosa. Rosa was 80 years old when we met her and had been blind from birth. She had never, ever owned a proper cook stove. And you can see there, that was the open fire that she boiled the water on for her coffee every morning. And her husband, Juan Carlos, they were childhood sweethearts, apparently, such a lovely story. They were so absolutely proud when we gave them the GCO. And they are part of carbon offsetting programs. So monitoring the usage and the reduction in carbon emissions. I was also very fortunate back in 2013 to visit CO2 balancers projects in Kenya. And so these are just a couple of little photos. They also work in Uganda, Rwanda, Mozambique, Madagascar. They're all over Africa. And again, unbelievable difference that we make in people's lives by setting up and running these projects. So Natalie, I think we are going to be doing our first poll.
Yep. Okay, so I launched the poll, and it seems like the poll has been launched for some time, actually. So their answers have been coming in. So I'm just gonna, I apologize, but it does seem like we have some active listeners in the group. So I'm just gonna give one more moment to people who haven't answered. Go ahead and give me 1 second. Let me just make sure I'm doing this correctly here.
I'm having a little bit of a problem to stop sharing my screen as well, actually.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and, are you able to see the poll results? Are you all able to see the poll results?
Yeah, I can see.
Great. Awesome. So Jane, Carl and I will go through the poll results, and maybe in the meantime, we can figure out the screen sharing situation. So the first question is approximately how many people live on this earth? And the majority of people answered 8 billion. And I believe that's the correct answer.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. It's about 9.9, almost 9.9 billion. So 2023, we expect to be at 8 billion.
Okay. And the second question, we're actually split right in the middle of these answers. So approximately how many people use dangerously polluting open fires?
It was 3 billion it was.
3 billion. So we have 5 people answered 1 billion, another 5 answered 4 billion. So it looks like right in the middle is the correct answer for that.
Yeah.
Moving on to number 3. How many tons is the average American's carbon footprint? And the most responded answer was 18. And I think that the listeners are correct on that one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
18.
What is the global average footprint? So the most responded answer was 8 tons, Carl. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Globally, the average is 8 tons.
Awesome. So lastly, if and where possible, what should we all be trying to do to ensure children of the future inherit a livable planet? And 80% of respondents responded all of the above. So that is the correct answer. Adjusting heating and cooling, because we know that those depend highly on HFCs, which have a great global warming potential. Driving less, and of course with driving less comes electrifying transport, eating less meat, and offsetting your carbon. So all of those. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing the results, and thanks to everyone who took those polls. And Carl, I'll invite you to share your screen so we can wrap up with the second half of the presentation.
Sure.
Let me make sure that you have screen sharing. Perfect.
Is that good?
Yep, you're good to go.
Fantastic. So everybody, I want to get into the project side of Grove Carbon and who we're working with currently to try and create carbon credits in these countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, as Jane pointed out. But first of all, I wanted to draw on Project Drawdown. And for those not aware, it is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And the reason I mention this is because out of all the solutions, the solutions with improved cook stoves and land management actually feature in the top 10 solutions out of the 100. So just from that standpoint alone, we know that trying to introduce a more efficient cook stove and trying to go back to traditional ways of farming will massively have a massive impact to create a better environment for the future. Sorry, hold on. Okay, get rid of my cursor. Sorry, used to using my cursor. I just wanted to mention first of all and draw your attention to the open fire, which you've seen in some of the other slides, and also the unsafe water, which is still unfortunately around 3/4 billion people still drink from these unsafe water sources. I still get stunned by that statistic, that nearly, approximately 3/4 billion people still only have access to unsafe water. And you've already discussed that 3 billion people still cook on open fires. So we want to do something about that. And this is why we started Grove Carbon. And okay, I'm gonna have to, sorry Jane, I'm gonna have to use my cursor. It's not working for some reason. I also want to draw on the fact that women and children are most at risk, mainly because they're the ones that are, as you can see in this picture, are walking. My average, I think, is between 3 and 4 miles a day to just go and collect water there and back. And then also you've got the other effects of being around the kitchen a lot and breathing in all those fumes. So women and children are most at risk, and we wanna try and avoid that. Wanted to start off in Dominican Republic, mainly because we've got our very own Miami-based Blue Missions group that are actively working in Dominican Republic, trying to, they are actually providing safe drinking water to thousands of people. It started by a guy called Danny Rodriguez, and he started it by going on a field trip 10 years ago. I think it was 11 years ago, and actually it's 10-year anniversary last year. And he was encouraged to do it by his father. He didn't want to do it. He was a young lad. He was more interested in basketball and all the rest of the activities that he was keen on at the time. But it really took hold of him, and so much so that after he went back and did another field trip, and then realized that he wanted to create his own organization. So Danny, with a help of friends and now the father on board as well, they created Blue Missions Group, and they're based in South Miami. in Sunset Place. So if you're ever there, pop into the mall there, and they're on the ground level, the first floor. I think you guys call it in the States. We call it the ground floor, but they're there in the on the ground floor there. Just wanted to point out a couple of the pictures here. The bottom left is a typical latrine that is used in Dominican Republic, and then the one on the right with all the guys sitting on top, that's the water source that has been built and then feeding families with clean, safe drinking water. Just to give you a couple of other statistics, approximately 2.4 billion people don't have access to a serviceable toilet of their own. Again, which I find quite astounding. Already mentioned, about 750 million people still drink from the dirty water sources. Moving on. Nicaragua now, and the two organizations here are EOS International and El Porvenir. The picture on the right is, of course, the first time people have seen running water, fresh, clean running water. And you can, just put yourselves in their shoes. This is something that not only is supporting, not only are these operations supporting healthy, clean living, but it's just for someone's own personal well-being. This is going to be a change for good for life. Statistics, some of these statistics are a little bit difficult to see, but I want to point out El Porvenir. They're not just supplying clean, safe drinking water. They've also gone into added benefits of planting trees or providing efficient cook stoves and latrines as well. So, and these are statistics from 2020, where we thought the world had stopped, but these guys still managed to get out into the rural communities of Nicaragua and provide these, provide these services. So, incredible organizations doing incredible work. Back to Guatemala, and we're working with Stove TV International, as Jane mentioned, and also Estufas Chipsa. This picture is another typical stove that you'll find in Guatemala. And as you can see, and hopefully imagine, not just from the burning wood and the fumes coming off the burning of the wood, but the plastic they're using to try and use as an alternative fuel source, because it's just freely available and obviously it's cheaper. So just imagine the fumes that are created when trying to cook on this fire. I feel like I'm going on a little bit too much about the statistics, but we need to realize that 3 billion people cooking in this way. We need to avoid it. We've got to do what we can to avoid it, and we can do this just by offsetting our carbon footprint. Close to 4 million die prematurely from illnesses attributed to cooking in this way, and close to half of these deaths due to pneumonia in children under 5 are due to cooking in this way. So, yeah, it's starkly obvious why we need to try and provide efficient cook stoves to these poor communities and families. So this is what we can provide. Jane has pointed out the little yellow stove from the previous slides, and the top right is one of the ones just not painted yellow, but the similar type. And then the other ones are the plancher stoves, which are more costly, obviously, but they stand the test of time longer. And you can do a lot more cooking on them, obviously, and they're a lot more versatile. But again, just the smiles in these pictures says it all for me. And the price is actually not too crazy. It's like for the most expensive is $120. So the stoves can range between $80 and $120. Something a little bigger may go up to $150, so not a lot. And if I can give you a statistic of Guatemala, they feel there's about 2 million people cooking on open fires in this for this method. And if you take five-person family across 2 million, that's 400,000 people. And I don't think 400,000 people is difficult to reach to provide in one of these. So again, just we need to do what we can to help make sure this happens. To Haiti now and regenerative agriculture. And a lot of Haiti is degenerative, just due to the history of the country. And we're trying to work with farmers to introduce traditional farming methods again. Because if you can utilize a land to grow crops and other commodities all in one area, you've got a much bigger carbon sink than the practices that we're used to today. So this is what we're trying to introduce. The degenerative side of things, we want to improve to make it regenerative, and that way we're taking a lot more CO2 out of the atmosphere. Again, carbon saving there. We're also trying to do this in Colombia, working with some farmers there, some tea farmers. This is an avoided deforestation project. So a lot of the Amazon, as you're probably aware, is trying to be cut down to make room for soybean plantations or for cattle. And going back to the traditional methods of farming, tea is a big crop in Colombia, and we want to use the natural vegetation that's already there and the crops already there to try and utilize those and bring that to market, rather than cutting down the forest and using it for soybeans or for cattle grazing. And same again in El Salvador. There again is shade grown coffee practices that we're trying to support. Back home now, back to Miami and West Palm Beach. I'll start with Miami first, and some of you on the call may be familiar with Send It for the Sea. Foundation organization started by Theo, and predominantly they clean the beaches, and they're heavily into beach cleanups. But after Irma, he was still at school, and he went around, after walking around after Irma had passed and been through Miami, he noticed many tropicals, the short little kind of seedlings of mangroves just scattered everywhere. And he was quite distraught at the fact that these were just going to die on the roads or on the parking lots where they weren't in their natural environment. So he started to collect these up and took them home and started to plant them, put them in little pots, fed them some water, and then tried to grow them, which he actually did. His brother then posted this on social media and it went viral, and the rest is history for these guys. I mean, they've got thousands of followers, they do great work, and we're wanting to support them by helping them plant more mangroves, working with the city to find areas where this can happen. And this is the same for these guys in West Palm Beach. They're called Mang. They've been going since 2015. And they've not only been planting mangroves in West Palm Beach, they've also been planting them in the Bahamas and Madagascar. These are a few photos up in West Palm Beach on some of the islands up there that have been created from dredging in other areas and piling it all up like a small sand island to then plant these mangroves. Of course, mangroves are going to sequester carbon, but I'm not sure if people are aware that they can sequester 3 to 5 times more CO2 than traditional trees, depending on the variety. So they're a great carbon CO2 sequestration plant. Fantastic. And of course, the added advantage of the biodiversity that comes with it, and then protecting our shorelines and coastlines from storm surge and hurricanes. So Jane touched on the co-benefits, and I wanna hone in on these, because this is another reason why we're really passionate about what we do. Yes, I'm trying to do everything in my life to reduce my carbon footprint, but when we offset our carbon footprint through the projects that we support, we're also supporting the the UN 17, the majority of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And some of these here I've highlighted. Want to draw on the attention of SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, and the connection with that with SDG 4, quality education. Just being able to provide children, adults, all of us with clean, safe drinking water allows us to be properly hydrated. And if it's there, it's a source that we can just draw on as and when we need to. You know, just mentally, it helps us improve in our daily lives. So the children are added benefit, so they can actually, you know, study harder at school and get a better education. We've got SDG 5, gender equality, obviously. So freeing up women's time of the day so they're not having to spend hours and hours at the stove is another great advantage of providing them with efficient cook stove or the safe drinking water. Climate action, obviously, through the regenerative agriculture, good health and well-being, through the efficient cook stoves, and the affordable and clean energy through the efficient cook stoves. So they just briefly, I wanted to touch on these code benefits, which we're immensely proud of, that carbon offsetting can actually benefit that in these ways. So what can you do to help? Well, as Jane mentioned, first of all, we want you to calculate your carbon footprint to find out what that is. Potentially be stunned by it, or potentially feel quite good if you're already taking steps to reduce it. Once you've worked out what that is, and you know that there are ways to reduce it, and yes, we've mentioned that it's difficult for some to put solar on our roofs or buy that electric vehicle. The best one I found is going plant-based. I wouldn't have been saying this 18 months, 24 months ago. I was a meat eater when I came to Miami. I didn't realize how much of an effect being a meater has on the planet. So I took baby steps, as I think we all need to do initially. And I went meatless Monday, which actually was obviously pretty easy. I then went mostly meatless. So most of the week I wouldn't have meat. Went about that way for a few months, and then I went to meat as a treat. And the meat as a treat, after a while, I then feel I didn't actually need to eat meat at all. So it's just progression with all these things. It's just trying to do what you can every day, having one little goal to reduce our impact, our negative impact on the environment. And of course, if you don't want to do any of it, then at least offset what you're being responsible for. That's the message I think that I'd like you to take away today is for all of us, we all need, we all live in this comfortable environment. Well, not so much when it's really hot, but we're inside, we've got AC on, and we should take some responsibility for that, I believe. So I hope you can too. Just wanted to end on this slide. We saw it a little bit earlier in the presentation. 2019, we emitted almost 60 billion tons, 60 gigatons, 60 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. The planet can only naturally, through the carbon cycle, can actually only sequester 20 billion. So we're spewing 40 billion tons more than the planet can effectively cope with. So we've got a long way to go. As Jane mentioned, the American carbon footprint, average carbon footprint is 18 tons. The global at the moment is 8 tons. For us to reduce that 40 billion tons, the global average has to be between 2 and 3 tons per person. So we've got a long way to go. Industry has to play their part. Policymakers have to play their part. Individuals have to play their part where they can. So hopefully you can get on board with this today, or after you've had a think about it, and start offsetting your carbon footprint. Jane, I think I've got the last slide for you.
Yeah, so just to end on a note of another another action that we are about to release onto our website. It does take a lot of money to set up carbon offsetting projects. It's usually around 25K. This obviously eats into the revenue that our partners get, because they get a proportion of the revenue back, so that they can invest further in their projects, cook stoves, water, land use, doesn't matter what it is. So we're going to be having a link on our website very soon to the partners that we're working with, for people to also donate to setting up these offsetting programs. And if you are a business owner, this could be a nice way for you to add some depth and breadth to your corporate social responsibility programs. So in other words, apart from the carbon offsetting piece and offsetting yours or your business's carbon footprint, we will be looking for funding for setting up projects as well. And I think, Natalie, we have the next poll.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and launch that second poll. And I'll give a few moments for everyone on the call to answer those 5 questions before we go into Q&A. Are you able to see the poll?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure the attendees are able to see the poll, because we haven't gotten any answers in yet.
Oh.
Maybe the questions are a bit stiff, maybe.
All right, we have had one person answer so far. Let's see if we can get the rest of the people on the call answering. I do see some more answers coming in, so maybe it was Zoom lagging on the response end. But it is really interesting to kind of see that the responses come in live on my end.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting some feedback that these are definitely, challenging questions, and questions that connect a lot of interesting and significant points that are worthy, of being unpacked. And just want to thank Carl and Jane for unpacking some of this today. We still have about half of the people on the call who haven't answered yet. So I'm gonna just give them another moment to get as many answers in as we can. And remember, this isn't being graded. So go ahead and answer even if you're not quite confident, because we're all learning in this, myself included. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and we'll explore a little bit of what the answers look like. All right, so the first question: how many people, approximately, women and children mainly, die each year from illnesses attributed to open fire cooking? So this one was pretty split. Carl or Jane, what's the correct answer?
Yeah, it's 4 million. So it was split, you're right, but 4 million was the right answer.
All right, and I think, when we get to see the answers to these questions, it really gives us a good idea of what's the general knowledge out there, and what can we do to bridge gaps that exist. So the second question: what percentage of deaths due to pneumonia among children under 5 are caused by soot inhalation from open fire cooking? So the most responded answer was 50%.
Correct.
That's correct. All right, awesome. So the majority of the people on the webinar answered that correctly. Approximately how many people still don't have access to clean, safe drinking water? And the answer that was most responded was 750 million.
Very good. Yes.
And we're awesome. The fourth question: approximately how many people still lack proper sanitation? And the most responded answer was about 2.4 billion.
Perfect, spawn. Very
Awesome.
good.
So I think what happened was that we might have led with a tough question, or maybe the respondents just gained more confidence as they worked their way down. And the last question, what does the global average carbon footprint need to be in order to stay below 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming?
Yes,
and
correct. 2 to 3 tons.
And 57% of the people who responded correctly, 2 to 3 tons. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who took a moment to answer these poll questions. Like I said, they're not getting graded. It's just to really see how you're internalizing this information, because it's not, as we all know with climate, nothing is linear. There's so many different relationships always happening and always at play. So I think those questions were great in just bringing all the different factors into the carbon offsetting conversation. So with the about 13 minutes that we have left, I want to open it up into discussion or question and answer. And I want to remind people on the call to please drop your questions in the Q&A tab. I've never had an opportunity to directly speak with someone who has founded a carbon offsetting company. So I see this as a privilege. So please make sure that you get your questions in. And I do have some that I want to start with. So you had mentioned that Grove Carbon is the only carbon offsetting company, not only in South Florida, but in Florida. Is that a lot of pressure?
A lot of pressure? It's a lot of pressure to make sure that nobody else opens one.
Okay. So you've got your business cap on. What does it feel like to be the only offsetting company in Florida?
I mean,
Proud.
Yeah, I mean, Carl, I don't know what. Well, we're very proud. First of all, most of the agencies in the U.S., the early pioneers, are located in California, which probably isn't a surprise to most people. What we feel may well resonate with people is the fact that we are Miami-based and we're developing projects in Latin America. And I think that's very relevant for the people that live in Miami. Yeah, Carl.
Exactly, Jane. No, 100%. That's exactly the reason why we founded Grove Carbon. Not just because we're in Miami, but we knew we could offer support to the projects, the organizations that are doing great work in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can see how it was strategic in that sense, because Miami is such a great hub for Central and South America, the Caribbean. So yeah, that's incredible. I have a question here in our Q&A from Lois. Do you have any examples of government agencies or local governments that are doing carbon offsetting?
Government level, no, I don't actually. It's generally, from what I know, it's from business level. And a lot of organizations that are in the spotlight. So like, Microsoft, Amazon, finally the airlines are starting to get on board. The US airlines, like Jane noticed the other day, American Airlines now have an option on their website. Finally, yeah. But I think it still needs to be driven from policy and at the government level, definitely. And then as we know, through doing the cohort from the individual level as well.
Yeah, 1000%. And so what I'm hearing in some of the themes that I've personally observed, ever since I started working at Clio, is that, kind of like that lack of federal response, it creates a room for businesses and for business leaders and enterprises to kind of bridge that gap. And it sounds like that's exactly what Grove Carbon is doing.
Yes, I mean, we work in what we call the voluntary market. So businesses and individuals voluntarily offset their carbon footprint. I will say that it's on Biden's agenda to introduce and increase a carbon tax. So where governments generally get involved, it's through a carbon tax. But I think that's a really good question, because one of the things that Carl and I have talked about is approaching Miami-Dade and the various departments within about, okay, how can they get involved in leading by example, you know? And I think that's something that's definitely on our agenda for the future. I think it's the government, whether it be state, local, federal, it's their responsibility to lead by example and do their own carbon offsetting and then promote it, you know?
Well, when you do approach Miami-Dade, just know that you have the full support of Cleo behind you.
We probably will need it.
I have a question that came in from Richard. Do you have an idea of how many companies do carbon offsetting?
I've done a fair amount of research on that. I wanted to know who our competitors are, obviously. There's a lot more out towards, you know, the European market. There's a few in Canada, and there's a few other than the West Coast in the US and Australia as well. So they're dotted around. They're dotted around globally, but southeast of the US, where we are, I still think I'm proud to say that we're the first ones.
The Trailblazers.
Yeah.
And I have another question from a different Richard. What category of businesses are using carbon offsets mostly today? And do you see any clear patterns emerging?
You know, it's probably not surprising to say that the tech companies are probably the biggest proponents and get involved mostly with carbon offsetting initiatives. So, I mean, Microsoft, of course, you know. But what we're noticing is that small to medium businesses are also now taking it on board. So, but there are, if we think about industries, there are specific industries. So travel and tourism, you know, I did notice that American Airlines have an option now to offset your flight finally. It's a little bit spotty, but I would say travel and tourism and the big tech guys are probably the leaders in this. And have been, you know, for a long time. I mean, interestingly, oil and gas too. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly in Europe, oil and gas, and this is coming to the US now. I mean, if you've seen any of the Chevron TV advertising recently, they talk a lot about sustainability and carbon offsetting and so on. I don't think there's the clear pattern that's emerging, I would say, is that businesses are becoming, there's a heightened sense of awareness and there's pressure on businesses from their investors, their shareholders, their employees, their supply chain, their customers. And that's gonna be a catalyst. Once that pressure becomes more and more becomes stronger, then I think more and more businesses are gonna, you know, relent in a way because they're gonna have to, you know.
Yeah, I think just from what I know, you know, consumers are demanding more transparency, and they're willing to pay more, you know, if that's what that means, you know, to ensure that you know, in whatever type of consumption they're participating in can be offset or can be fair trade, etc. So I think the market will just continue to be ripe for growth carbon. Another question that came up is, how many companies actually offset their carbon?
I think it's tricky to know, honestly. I mean, as I said before, it's mostly tech, I believe, travel, some utilities, oil and gas. I think it's difficult to quantify that. I'm not aware of any official stats. Are you, Carl?
No, and the trouble being, which I believe where policy could get involved, is there's no, in the US I'm talking about, there's no legislation for people to prove their emissions. And that, I think, does need to happen. It should be transparent. We should know who are the worst culprits and what their emissions are and what they're doing about it to reduce those emissions, first and foremost, and what they're, how much they're offsetting, whether it's a minimal amount. So yeah, I think more transparency is needed, and maybe that can be brought into legislature and policy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I think we have enough time for just one more question. And I want to ask, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned since you've been doing this work?
Good question.
You go first.
I'm actually trying to think of it. The most surprising thing, did you say, Natalie?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think I would say more shocking. I don't know about surprising.
Yeah, so maybe shocking would be, anything that may be unexpected.
Yeah, so for me, it was the statistics of, of what we've just described in our presentation. The poor communities that are still living the way they do in this day and age, and that doesn't, let's not take away any of the poor communities in the US as well. The people living on the streets in Miami, there's poor everywhere, but everyone should have access to safe drinking water. That's just, and I know the UN and part of the SDG 2030 campaign is to make sure that we try and reach these goals of the 17 SDGs by 2030, and unfortunately we're way off track. So a lot more needs to be done. So for me, that's surprising, obviously, but shocking. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think for me, to kind of build on that, yes, the most shocking thing for me is how behind we are, based on the Paris Agreement and so on. And the other shocking thing for me has been, as I've started to have a dialogue with people about this and talk about what we do at Grow Carbon, but talk about the bigger picture of climate change, the number of people who still say it's not my responsibility. That's a sad, surprising thing for me. But we've been through this on the CSN course. There's going to always be that chunk of people that you're never going to convert.
Yeah, and the famous Caroline Lewis has advised me to not concern myself too much with those group of people, and to really just work with the people who are open to learning and open to growing, and sometimes that does mean taking more personal responsibility and not shunning away from that. And with that being said, it's 6:30, so just like that, an hour has gone by. I can't believe it. Carl, Jane, would you like to say anything else before we wrap up the webinar?
Just a massive thank you to everyone that's joined, and the opportunity you've Clio Institute's given us, Natalie. It's great. It's always great to support you and the work you guys do. So for you to be able to do that in return for us, greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And just to say, whether you offset your carbon footprint with Grow Carbon or not, please do it.
Please do it. I did drop the link to Grow Carbon's website in the chat. Like Jane and Carl mentioned, they're going to have some really new and exciting tools on their website in the very near future. And I know that if we wanted to get in touch with anyone at Grove Carbon, that we could, make sure to facilitate that, whether it's by connecting you via email. So just thank you again, Carl and Jane. The feeling is absolutely mutual. It's all about, building community around climate solutions, and just thank you for being so inspiring in that way.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. We hope that you learned a lot. According to some of the comments in the chat, it was a very informative webinar for people. So make sure to stay in touch with Grove Carbon to support them. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Bye guys. Thank you.